It's good to be back. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to our draft analysis for Season 2 of the PPL. I'm so excited to be back in the PPL, playing so many good friends. This is definitely a legacy season where you have people who were in the old PPL season 6-7 years ago. Now, if you remember at all, my Season 1 experience was definitely like a bit weird. I started out really strong, and as my dissertation came closer and closer, I sort of began to start losing a lot, and despite, making semifinals, which I will say was pretty good of an accomplishment as someone who had never played a Gen 9 League before, I felt pretty bummed leaving the way that I did, feeling like I really didn't put my foot on the gas as best as I could have, and this season I feel like I have something to prove. This season it is win, and that's all I have my eyes on. We are going to win this season of the PPL. I am tired of being in semifinals. I'm tired of being in finals and not winning. This has happened for far too long in the past few years of me playing Draft League, and I'm tired of not being the champion of leagues. I know that I am strong enough to be able to do it, and I know I am a good enough player to make it happen, and I've just decided I'm winning this season. I'm gonna do it, and that's my goal. I have no goals to make playoffs. I have no goals to have a certain record. I have no goals to have MVP, heat of the week, nothing. I just want to win. I want to win this season. It's big to me. It's really important to me, and it's gonna happen. And going in line with that mentality shift, I'm just gonna say it. I think we have the best team in the league. I already think that the team that I have this season is better than the team I had last season. So if that tells you anything about my excitement about this draft, it should tell you a lot. I tend to find that draft analyses are a bit boring. I think people do them wrong. I think that people oftentimes will show them on and will say certain moves that the Mon has, or perhaps say like a certain move set that they could run, or maybe list heat sets that they're never going to actually bring throughout the season. I just don't think it's a really educational way to do draft league analysis videos. And something that my friend Matt, who's also in this league, Dr. Slacking, go check him out, does he does draft announcements where he'll just show the entire draft and tell you what it is, and then he'll kind of just be like, here you go, this is the team. I'm not going to do that. I think it's a cool way to do it. I've done it before, but I don't want to do that this time. I want to try and make it some kind of educational process, although I'm not entirely sure how to do it. So the way that I've sort of devised is perhaps the most valuable way for me to show my draft on as part of a draft analysis, I should say, is not to analyze the draft itself, but to analyze the process by which I came to decide what Mons I was picking in my draft. So I'm going to, instead of doing pick by pick, I'm going to do phase by phase and show you different phases of the draft and how I sort of adapted and molded my draft over time, figuring out and analyzing what roles that I needed for my next picks, and how I was able to do that, not just with one pick, but with a series of upcoming picks. I don't know, I'm just not going to really say much about the Mons themselves, as much as I'm going to talk about how they sort of fit in with the draft as a whole and what role they play based on my mentality towards when I draft them. And it might end up being that what I say I drafted a Mon of the role for, it could be that I don't use that Mon for that role. It could mean that I never used that Mon that entire season. Who knows? This is just my thought process as the draft was going on. It could be accurate to how I play the team. It could be inaccurate to how I play the team. Enjoy the draft analysis. Hopefully you enjoyed this format. And let me know if you do. Let me know in the comments if you do. All right. And let's get into it. Okay, so as you could tell by the thumbnail of the video, round 1 was Deoxys Speed. I'm not really going to explain much to it. I just want to use Deoxys Speed. It was new this gen. I liked it. It's a cool mod. I've used it once before in a Showdown League. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a ton of fun. There's no restrictions on it, so I can use Meteor Beam. I can use Nasty Plot. All of those things that sometimes would be complex banned, I'm allowed to use. So I just picked it because I wanted to. I thought it was pretty good. I almost took Garchomp. I was incredibly close to taking Garchomp. I chose Deoxys Speed because I didn't want to be boring. I've used Garchomp a million times before. I can show people how to use Garchomp at some point in my life on this channel. I've used it probably upwards of 100 games in Draft League, maybe. I don't know. Deoxys Speed I've only used 10 or so. So I drafted Deoxys Speed 1 because I really wanted to. B because I thought it was the second best mod on the board that wasn't Garchomp. And C because I wanted to get more games in with it. Sometimes people draft these sorts of mods because they think it's clickbait or something. if I wanted clickbait, I would have drafted like Terapagos. To me, I just want to use the Deoxys speed. I don't know if it's great this gen or not. It's new. We haven't experimented with it this meta. But I do know 2 things about Deoxys speed, and that is that it is a spike stacker, although you don't want it to be a spike stacker, because it is also a cleaner, which can just run like 4 attacks, or it is a setup threat with like Calm Mind, Recover, or Nasty Plot. So those are some sets we want to like be bearing in mind as we construct our draft to make sure that we have mons on this draft that enable each and every one of those sets to be as sort of freed up as it possibly can be. But I don't want to do that right away with my round 2, so that's why we have Greninja here. Greninja is quite literally the best mon on the board at the time that I got to pick. I gave it 0 extra thought other than that. There was no other mon on the board that I thought was better than Greninja here. I wanted the second, but like I wanted my second pick to just be the next best mon on the board. If the next best mon on the board was like another psychic type, I would have taken that mon. I literally just wanted to take the next best mon on the board because I want to make sure that the top of my draft has power. So I can build around 2 mons. That's fine. I don't need to build around 1 mon. I can build around 2 mons simultaneously in a draft, build parts of a draft that enables 1 mon, build parts of a draft that enables the other. Ultimately, though, Greninja and Deoxys benefit in this very mysterious and weird way when you draft them together, and that is that they both really, really want to be endgame cleaners. So Greninja with its Battle Bond, really, really effective, like endgame cleaner. Win condition, it's a very effective win condition. Deoxys Speed with its setup potential is also a very, very effective win condition. So they're both endgame mons. If they're not sweeping, then they can be used in the early game to set up hazards. They don't necessarily want to be doing those hazard rolls, but the fact that I have 1 mon that could do an endgame thing, allowing the other to do the hazard roll, and vice versa, is very cool to start out with. So right now, the position that I'm in is that I have 2 mons that desire being endgame Pokemon. Pokemon that like come out during the third of the game to really like wrap it up and claim the win. They can flex into early game rolls if they want, but they don't want to flex into those early game rolls. So what we're looking for right now is we're looking for mons that fill the sort of early game rolls that we're looking for. This could include, hazard setters that are more reliable hazard setters than potentially Greninja or Deoxys, especially, if they want to be doing other things, right? So mons that at their best are consistently, reliably setting up spikes or stealth rocks. And we also want Pokemon that are viable dedicated leads. That's something else that's very important to me this generation, is making sure that I have like sort of bulky Pokemon that can lead and sort of offensively pressure opponents rather than having, passive leads, defensive pieces that are meant to switch into certain type combinations. I give 0 shit about type synergy on this draft. I think type synergy is massively overrated this gen. So we're looking for early game pieces that complement our end game pieces that we've drafted in the first 2 rounds. Hopefully that makes sense. So those early game pieces that we ended up drafting on the team are Dragonite, Swampert, and Tinkaton. Now Swampert is incredibly self-explanatory. It gets up rocks, it can flip turn, it can roar, early things out, it can do all of these sort of things that are good things you want Setamons to do. It has a bunch of bulk to it, allowing it to sponge a few hits in the early game against sort of their lead threats. It's a good early game mon. Tinkaton, similarly, is a mon that wants to be knocking things off in the early game. It wants to be sending up stealth rocks in the early game. Swampert does the same thing because it just got knockoff as well. So those 2 help each other. Even though they do the same thing, it helps because one can do the rocks / knockoff thing and the other can do something completely different, because these are still versatile mons that aren't just doing one thing. They free each other up in that way. So hopefully that makes some semblance of sense. Now Dragonite is a bit trickier, right? So people would look at Dragonite and say that's a Dragon Dance cleaner. That's a Pokemon you want to be setting out in the end game to collect Dragon Dance and win the game. I think that's a very narrow vision of what Dragonite truly is. And while Dragonite can do that, and while I could expect myself to try that once or twice this season, I actually think that Dragonite is just as, if not more effective in the early to mid game, because if you're leading Dragonite as a dedicated lead, you can use multi-scale to your advantage while still holding an item because you don't have to be boots. If you're using Dragonite in the early game with a choice band, you're forcing your opponent to swap around, choice banded outrages and extreme speeds and stuff like that, and really like take a lot of chip early game on things like steel types, which Greninja and Deoxys Speed really appreciate being chipped. It could be a special sort of lead set in a really like hyper competitive Smogon Draft League tournament that I competed in between season 1 and this season. I crafted a lead Dragonite with multi-scale weakness policy that was like Scale Shot, Hurricane, Thunder, and God, what was the last one? It was like Iron Head. So just like 4 attacks that covered the entire team. I could never be killed in one hit by the lead Pokemon. Any super effective hit would like put me at like a weakness policy boost and then like plus 1 in speed because of Scale Shot. So, it's a Pokemon you literally have to consider from every vantage point in the game. It could be a mid-tier breaker, a mid-game breaker. It could be an early-game dedicated lead. It can be an end-game sweeper. So Dragonite's probably the most flex of all the 5 mons that I've drafted so far, but it was drafted with the intention of being a good early to mid-game mon, similarly to Swampert and Tinkaton, which have those rocks and have those knockoff rolls, as well as, pivoting for Swampert. And yeah, so hopefully those make sense. Those synergize quite well, being early game Pokemon that I can use as a means to allow for Greninja or Deoxys, depending on which one I pick in a given week, to, really take away with the end game. So what I'm looking for now, heading into my next 2 picks, is I'm looking for essentially more breakers, because what we are seeing right now is while we do have Banded Dragonite, it can also want to be in a defensive role. It could also want to be in a dedicated lead, like trade 1-for-1 role. And Greninja and Deoxys are both special attackers. So what we're primarily looking for here is we're looking for physical breakers that essentially our team can take advantage of pivoting wise. So we're missing some pivots, and what's useful about pivots on a team like this is we have a lot of hazards, right? So we have a lot of ability to pivot around our opponents taking hazards. Combined with a sizable amount of knockoff. I mean, the majority of our team has knockoff right now because Deoxys gets knockoff too. So knockoff boots, rack up hazard chip, stuff like that. So we're looking really for like a physical U-turn mon that brings in Fizz-Def walls or brings in Pokemon that Deoxys and Greninja can take advantage of, to break with, or to even start setting up their endgame sweeps. Yeah, let's take a look at what we got for that. So for this 3rd phase of our draft, we have picked up Mienshao and Serena as mid-game Pokemon that should hopefully be able to enable Deoxys or Greninja in the late game, depending, again, on the matchup. So Mienshao in particular works really, really well with Greninja and Deoxys. And I could talk about like the typings that Mienshao baits in, which could be relevant in particular matchups, but I don't think is relevant for like considering the draft as a whole. What's really relevant about Mienshao is that it's capable of clicking U-turn, and it's capable of baiting out a lot of Pokemon that are physically defensive that my 2 special breakers can come in on and either KO or threaten out, allowing setup with Battle Bond or Nasty Plot in the case of Deoxys. Or, Mienshao can also just start like clicking, banded high jump kicks and start breaking things for, the next breaker to come in and start breaking things, being, one of our first 2 picks. So Mienshao sort of is able to be a mid-game Pokemon. It can be a breaker in itself, allowing for the endgame cleaners to exist. It can be a pivot into those endgame cleaners. It could be both. It really depends. It's also a really nice dedicated Scarfer, so we don't want to be using Greninja or Deoxys as our way of outspeeding, say, a +1 Dragon Dance Pokemon. We want to be able to have a Pokemon that is able, at reliable speed tier, to be able to outspeed, say, a +1 Necrozma or a +1 Hydreigon or a +1 Salamence or whatever. So we want to make sure that we're having good revenge killers that stop our opponent's game plans before we're able to execute our own. So Mian Xiao fills a lot of those roles. Serena is really effective at also being a physical breaker in games where Mian Xiao might be less effective at being a physical breaker, or it could tag team with Mian Xiao and really like double head onto those, you know, physically defensive mons. It really has a lot of like options here. It can spin. Spin is really nice on it. That's a good option to have in the early / mid game that, you know, frees up things like Dragonite, frees up things like Greninja and Deoxys. But I don't think it is necessarily a thing that defines the Mon entirely. I think the Mon, just by clicking Knockoff and Power Whip in itself, is a really, really strong combination. In a way, it's almost like a budget Zarude. So it works quite well for what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for even more Knockoff, which is amazing. I get to knock off Choice Scarfs, which is like huge, into like Greninja and Deoxys speed. I get to knock off, you know, potential Custap berries, potential, you know, anything that could potentially stop my team item-wise. So knockoff spam is absolutely huge on this team. 5 out of my 7 team members have knockoff, which is crazy after you think about the distribution of knockoff at the start of the gen. But that was very intentional. Knockoff is absolutely huge, and it's what makes my team as incredible as it is. But in particular with Serena, it's also just its breaking potential. Its breaking potential is absolutely massive for wearing things down, especially things that Greninja in particular wants broken down. So we're talking about really like pesky, bulky grasses that will come in on Serena and then have to tank like a triple axle, or have to, you know, tank a U-turn as, you know, I'm able to go into my Dragonite and start using it as setup or something. So there's a lot of different roles that Serena offers me offensively, as opposed to just being a spinner. It can just, you know, be a physical breaker in itself, because it's strong Pokemon. Serena's really good. So going into the next 2 rounds, I'm looking for essentially just some holes to get patched. I'm really now looking defensively at my draft, because I think that I have sort of the needed pieces to fulfill a game plan just with these 7 mons. And that was really my goal heading into the drafting process, to make sure that, you know, with the first, you know, 6-7 mons on my team, I feel like I could look at purely those 6-7 mons on my team and formulate a game plan. So in that regard, now we want to start looking towards what we have trouble with, essentially. So in particular, one thing that I think we don't necessarily have that could be useful is status spreading. That's something I really think is crucial. Another thing that I think we're struggling with right now is having ground immunities, which is not necessarily important in the context of like making sure you have all the immunities and resistances that you need. It's more so just making sure that we're not losing to like certain choice scarf Pokemon, say like a Scarf Crocodile, which I lost, which my season ended to last season. So we're definitely going to want some not grounded Pokemon. We're definitely going to want you know, Pokemon that can defensively take on certain things. I'm looking at like ghost types right now, like Spectures in this league. It absolutely fucking mauls me. So these next 2 picks are kind of reactive picks, but I think they're okay to be reactive picks because I've already formulated game plans with my first 7. And now the rest of the mons that I pick can, you know, situationally come on my team in worlds where certain Pokemon just have bad matchups, or where, you know, my opponent has such a crucial threat against my team that I just need to sort of step outside my highest tier picks in order to deal with it. So with that in mind, the next 2 picks that I ended up getting were Ursaring and Rotom Fan. Ursaring I got as kind of a defensive Pokemon. It can still be a breaker, obviously, with like Guts. It's incredible. But I also really wanted a bulky normal. I wanted something that could take on Spectre, which Mountay got. So like I definitely want to have something that can take on Spectre. And then in particular, I want something that can just really like punish ghost types in general. There's a lot of like really high tier ghost types in this league that I just want Ursaring for. I just want Ursaring. I had Pult last season. Ursaring is really good against Pult. Like, just in general, it's really strong to have like a fat normal on my team, if not just to deal with ghost types. I just don't want to think about it. I don't want to think about the matchup. And, you know, it's not saying that ghost types are scary, right? I'm not fucking afraid of like a Mismagius or anything. I'm basically just saying that there's a lot of high tier threats that happen to be ghost types that Ursaring beats. So that's why Ursaring's on the team. It's to deal with the high tier threats, not necessarily a typing as a whole. And then Rotom Fan similarly fills the desire of my team to have a bit more status spreading, which I pretty much entirely lack right now. So being able to spread burns is huge. Being able to spread T-Wave is huge. I'm pretty sure I'm only able to do that with Tinkaton right now. So yeah, Rotom fills that role. It's not grounded, so I'm not going to lose Scarf Earthquakes. And that's kind of it. So the next two picks are Volcanion and Swalot. Now Swalot is my grounded poison. Ooh, that's a terrible grounded poison. You're gonna lose T-Spikes every week. Volcanion was a reactive pick. I wanted to be able to like be stronger against offensive fairies. Like I don't know. I was worried that Tinkaton wasn't defensive enough or something. I'm kind of shitting on these two picks because I'm shitting on these two picks. I traded them away week 2, so why would I analyze them in my week 1 draft analysis? So what I actually replaced them with, booyah, I replaced them with these two goats right here. Look at those. So one of these Pokemon I'm really excited to have on my team. One of them I'm not really. The one I'm clearly excited to have on my team is Qwilfish. And before anyone in the comments goes, oh my god, you have 3 water types, you're so bad at the game, what the fuck did I say? I said type synergy does not matter this generation. In a way, having multiple of the same type is really useful because they all bait in the same thing. So having 2 flip turners that bait in bulky waters for me to go into like Serena is huge. That's awesome. So like I will take that. But you know, Qwilfish also, what it gives me outside of a poison type and a good anti-fairy mon and a grounded poison and a T-Spikes user that isn't Greninja, is it basically gives me another spiker. And you could say, well, Addy, you already have Greninja, you already have Deoxys, why do you need another spiker? Again, what I say at the beginning, I want to be sure that I'm enabling Greninja and Deoxys as much as possible. And if I want to be bringing my Deoxys and Greninja in their optimal sets every week, I need to make sure that if I see an optimal Deoxys set and an optimal Greninja set in the same week, and neither of those sets can afford to run spikes, I want to make sure that I have the option to still run spikes if I want to. So Qwilfish offers that role. I want to be able to build a team like I still don't have spikes, even though I do have spikes, because I don't want to be running spikes on my Greninja or Deoxys every week. They could be really good at doing it for a week, but I don't want to be forced into doing it. I want to choose to do it. So if I end up bringing, Spikes Greninja some week over Spikes Qwilfish, I want it to be because Spikes Greninja looks really good. I don't want it to be because I had to bring Spikes, which means I had to pivot away from the optimal Greninja in order to bring Spikes, if that makes sense. So Qwilfish just gives me another option if Greninja and Deoxys prefer to be doing other things. Sometimes they might not prefer to be doing other things, but I want the option to go Qwilfish if they do. Indeedee is there because I had 7 points left and I didn't know what to do with it, and I was already making the transaction for Qwilfish, and I wasn't going to keep Swalot, and I had to trade away Volcanion, and I was looking in the 7 points here, and it was really freaking bleak, but I had 7 points left, and I guess, maybe, it's possible that I could do some Expanding Force Deoxys Speed shenanigans this season. Do I think this is a really good strategy with Deoxys Speed? Not really, and it's because I just don't believe in Indeedee as a Pokemon. I think Indeedee is not a Pokemon. I think I drafted Psychic Terrain. I don't think I drafted Indeedee. I think I drafted an ability, which admittedly I did, but I didn't really see anything else more valuable to do with the 7 points. I figured everything else my team filled a role. At the very least, I have a Psychic Terrain mode that I can do if I ever feel like it's a Hail Mary option or could catch my opponent by surprise or whatever. Don't expect this team to be reliant on the Psychic Terrain. It's not. I don't really care about this Indeedee, but there could be matchups where it looks good. Hell, I could bring it to 6 games this week. Maybe it looks incredible, but this is just my initial sense of it. So I just wanted the option of doing it. I'm well aware that I have priority on my team with E-Speed Dragonite. I'm well aware that I have, Water Shuriken on my Greninja. I'm well aware that Psychic Terrain stops those things. I don't really care. I can build around that. It's just a mode. It just offers me a mode. And you know what? I'll take a 7-point extra mode for my team. So this is what we got. Week 1, we take on Crimson Seabad. Hopefully this was educational enough for you. Sort of took you through a journey and where my brain space was at as I drafted. It also gives you a little bit of information about how I draft. I never look at type charts, really, outside of like tail end of the draft to just make sure I'm not missing any resistance to anything. But realistically, those things come together naturally. So for me, it was mostly about gathering knockoff, gathering early / mid-game pieces after getting these top 2, and really just making sure I got mons that were sturdy and versatile. All of these mons that I got after Greninja and Deoxys are definitely not glass cannons. They're bulky offensive pieces that support my glass cannons quite well. So I'm excited. I'm excited for the team. I think it has a really, really strong game plan behind it, and I think everything was drafted to support each other. So there's only one last thing to talk about, and that's Tera captains. I completely forgot about that. Whoops. Look at me getting ahead of myself. So let's circle back really quick. Okay, Tera captains. I could change this mid-season. I have no idea. I'm going to sort of toy around with it until the trade deadline comes. Realistically, I can Tera any combination of 2 between Tinkaton, Serena, Ursaring, Rotom Fan, Quillfish, and Indeedee. I can basically pick 2 of those 6 and make those my Tera captains. So it's essentially just going to be picking and choosing. I decided to do Serena Ursaring at the start because I really liked how my team supported Serena offensively, so I wanted to make sure I was really like enabling it offensively as much as possible with, you know, Tera boosted knockoffs or the ability to hit fires and poisons with ground coverage. And then as far as Ursaring goes, people were telling me it's a really good Tera captain, so I did it. It gives me a ghost type, which means that, you know, I have a spin blocker, which could be useful. But also, like, Tera Fairy is a good thing. I could be Tera Normal, like Guts Facade. It just sounds really broken. So it's possible I make, you know, neither of them my Tera captain by the end of the season. It's possible that they stay my Tera captains the entire season. It's possible that I change one to something else. I have no idea. So this is the Tera aspect of this team is going to be quite experimental as the season goes on. But you know, I think the right Terramons will emerge as the season progresses, and that's all I can say. So cool. All right, now I'm really ending the video. Next week, Crimson Seabad, week 1, PPL. Look forward to it. We're back. Woo! All right. Bye, everyone.